Welcome, everybody, to the Tinker Tribe podcast. I'm your host, Greg Dowd, and tonight I have the opportunity to sit down with Seven Seas. Recently, I was on a panel with him on the Union of the Unwanted and run into him at the Third Eye Carnival up in around Nashville. Seven's been doing a lot of research and making connections. Been building the this mapping model to share with his audience so that people can understand how our current system operates, and which is a really cool tool. So, very happy to have you on, brother. Really appreciate you coming on to talk to me, and want to dive into your story tonight. Welcome to the Tinker Tribe, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. We met at Third Eye, and then shortly after that panel, I started to understand that you were like sort of doing a lot of the things that I kind of talk about people should do, like networking locally and setting up food systems and stuff for yourself, and just anything you can to get away from that grid. And I was like, man, I got to talk to this guy because like practicing what you preach is big to me. And it does take all of us sort of at that local level. So thanks for what you do too, man. It's awesome stuff.
Yeah, I got a little intimidated by being on the panel with all y'all, the deep researchers, because I'm like, I'm sitting there and I listen to you guys and what you're talking about, and I read, but I don't have the time currently to be able to dive into everything as much as I would like to.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little behind on everything that's going on. So I appreciate you guys and what you're doing to get the word out about everything that's going on, because it's a really helpful thing, because I'm able to listen to it while I'm at work a lot of times and kind of get caught up on everything that's going on. So I really appreciate that about what you're doing. Um, so I know a little bit that about how you got started with this, and was listening to you talking to Monica Perez a little bit about your story, and you were kind of doing some like streaming originally, I guess, and then you were just wanting to do some deeper dives into things. Like, could you talk a little bit about how this all started for you?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So it all starts back when I was a child. I always had a problem with authority. My parents saying like just because I said so, like that never vibed with me very well. Going into school, it was sort of the same way, and that just ended up going into like with work, where more often than not, I found myself always getting in trouble for wanting to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Um, it's like I'd come across something that isn't doing right by the customer or the employees or something like that, or it's just dishonest, and I would like call it out. And instead of being, thanked or whatever and being like, hey, you did the right thing, you're doing a good job, you always get in trouble for that shit because it hurts the bottom line. I'm sorry about the cussing, but
Oh, you're
um,
fine.
it ultimately ends up like hurting the bottom line. And I would say about I think it was 3 years ago now, that I decided to quit my last job. I was trying to do the right thing yet again, was getting in more trouble. So I was like, fuck this, I'm just going to work for myself. Ended up quitting there, and then that's when I started like streaming on YouTube and stuff like that. And I was used to play video games like all the time,
Yeah.
and I was just like a game streamer. And I had woken up back in high school watching Zeitgeist, and then like digging into the Rothschilds and the Clinton kill list and Obama and all that stuff.
Oh,
So
in high school.
yeah, yeah, and I wanted to slowly like start incorporating like politics and stuff into my gaming streams just to like have different stuff to talk about. And it was like right after the Trump assassination attempt in Butler, where he picked JD Vance as his VP. That's where I started to like really, really deep dive and figured out who Peter Thiel was. Started looking into all of the things that he's connected to, and that's what started like the mind mapping stuff, because
Okay.
it was like way too much to keep track of just
Right.
like with this one guy. So it sort of served as like an organization thing for me, and I started posting like screenshots and stuff of that, and people seemed to resonate with it. And so then I decided to like start live streaming myself. I got the attention of David Icke and the Iconic Network, and I was I did a like a 10 episode series with them on their website that you can go check out.
Oh, cool.
Um, yeah, it was I tried to hit like all the main points in 10 episodes of like how I think we got to where we are now with the whole technocratic thing.
Uh-huh.
Covers like the Rockefeller takeover of the medical field and how they kind of like privatized like medicine. Talks about like the French Revolution and Hegelian idealism, which is like that whole Hegelian dialectic thing that we have going
Problem,
on.
reaction, solution.
Exactly, exactly. That was exactly what they did for the French Revolution back then. Is they had a king that was like so terrible that it was basically inevitable that there would be a revolution, and that was used to then install like new ideas and sort of like highly progressive agendas at the time. And Hegel and all of his buddies were super excited about all of that stuff because every time a regime change happens, it leaves like this vacuum for new ideas and concepts to kind of be explored, and then that left them the opportunity to push that.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what we had with like the Joe Biden thing. I think is where like he was so terrible on purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because listening to one of your recent discussions with Monica talking about how Trump kind of fits this like this character to kind of subdue a lot of the people that were given a lot of pushback during the Biden administration to now just allow all this technocracy and all these guys like Larry Ellison and Sam Altman and Thiel to like kind of come in and just be like, we got to do the AI stuff to win the AI race, and we got to track and trace and do everything, all this stuff, so that we
Yep.
can have a good future. So
Yep. Yeah, and
don't
it's
even worry about it.
absolutely, man. And it's crazy too because like before the election happened, they were talking about like illegal immigration. I saw it all the time, all these videos of people crossing the border, and I was like, we're probably going to get digital ID in the next like when Trump gets elected because I feel like everybody kind of saw it coming. I'm not like, some mystic. I didn't see anything that wasn't written on the wall or whatever because Joe Biden was barely functional, I think on purpose, um
Yeah.
but yeah, it seemed like it was getting played up so much worse than I've ever seen in my lifetime. And it was all the time. And then, he selects Christy Noam, who was talking about digital ID and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, it's a wrap. We're gonna get digital ID. We're getting crypto. We're getting AI. And I got in multiple fights with Ian Carroll.
Yep. Yep. He kind of blew up really quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, he was like very very pro Trump and like everybody in the administration, and I was like, how are you like this pro Palestine calling out Israel guy, but you're getting people to support like the most pro Israel president I've ever seen in my life. And
Hmm.
that was way before the election, and then obviously it happened. We're here now. We've had anti-Semitism bills, billions go over to Israel, and things like the Abrahamic Alliance got passed. So they're kind of like strengthening Israel's place with countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, and things like that.
Yeah. I was just listening to that one show that you did with the guy talking about the Kabbalah and
Mm-hmm.
getting into some of that stuff. And it's like, wow, this is pretty ancient when you get into it,
Oh yeah,
This
yeah.
very much seems like the world that we're seeing now has been a long play in to moving toward what we're seeing come into fruition.
That's that's kind of my perspective. I'm sort of like a big picture guy, where it's like it seems like a lot of people get hung up on details, and it's like you don't really need those to kind of get an idea of where you're going. It's like
Yeah,
it's like reading directions, right? Like the main points. You don't need to know exactly like what mile marker or whatever that like you're gonna eventually get there and you'll figure it out along the way kind of thing. But if you know where you're going, you can work your way back. And so, um, I've just kind of like dug through history as much as I possibly can, trying to like keep my biases suspended, and suspension of disbelief and stuff. And as far as I can tell, just like using historical records and like genealogical records and stuff, I was able to go back about as far back as 6,000 years ago.
Okay.
And it was a lot to do with like the Silk Road and them trying to capture like the East and the West and pit them against each other. And we still see that today with things like the West versus countries like China and Russia. And that seems to have been their like modus operandi since then. And it's not like one of these things where 6,000 years ago they were like, in the year 2030 we're gonna do a technocracy or something like that. But the ultimate goal is just maintaining control by facilitating like these false paradigms and getting people to relent, one thing here, one thing there, until eventually they've relented everything and they have nothing left to give.
Yeah, yeah, that's very much how I've seen it as well. Is like it's ultimately it's about wanting to control others, and then there's the rest of the people that just want to be left alone, and
Yeah.
like, could we just get left alone and be able to like have a peaceful life where people aren't trying to control every aspect of what we're doing all the time?
Right. Well, and that's the thing too, is like, uh, do you have to make trillions of dollars? Do you have to get all my medical information and lock me into this like digital dystopia because you need to turn the billions into trillions and have even more? It's like, when is it enough?
Yeah, when is it gonna end? Why is where are you gonna stop?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's about that. It's just about control. It's at a certain point you have enough, you have plenty, and it's just about exerting the control at
Yeah.
at a certain point because they've gone through all the other dopamine hits.
Yeah. Well, too, like when we start talking about like this whole transhumanist agenda, and the fact that you have people like Peter Thiel that are trying to fund ways to live forever, and you have like the Alcor Life Extension Foundation. You have Jeffrey Epstein who wanted to be frozen, and with all of this like vaccines and genetic therapy, CRISPR, mRNA stuff, it's like, man, we're getting into some real dangerous like sci-fi territory. You ever seen the movie Gattaca?
Yeah, I reference Gattaca sometimes
Yeah.
with people about designer babies and stuff like that, and I'm like, okay, guys, y'all need to go watch Gattaca.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. It's crazy because like, we're obviously seeing like decreasing fertility rates across the world. And there's like talks of the FDA, considering approval for artificial wombs, and they have IVF all over the place. And to me, it's like, okay, this is one of those big picture things where like, yeah, right now there's nothing, but you need to look 10, 15 years from now.
Where does
Um,
this lead us? Yeah.
Exactly. And it's like, you look at the launch of the first iPhone, for example. Nobody could have foreseen what would come 15 years later. And it's like, you have to keep that same mindset because this is the same people pushing the same technologies to do the same things, which is spy, control, and like you said. And I think like points are converging to where like birthing somebody naturally is going to be like a privilege that you have to earn.
Yeah,
And
wasn't that in Gattaca? It was
yeah,
talking about how natural born people were very rare and basically they were considered like the lowest of the low in society.
yeah, yeah. And you have like Elon Musk talking about like using IVF for his kids. You have RFK who's invested in CRISPR companies, and uh, at every Operation Warp Speed. You know.
Yeah, you said something interesting with the interview with Monica about how one of these was it Epstein that may have had a bunch of kids or something like that through g- genetic stuff or something
Oh,
that you were mentioning.
yeah, I do think that he was more than likely, fertilizing people secretly, whether that was like harvesting their eggs or, just doing the deed, whatever that looks like. There's survivors out there that have sort of talked about his like eugenic side of everything versus just the like the sex trafficking stuff. Juliet Bryant would be a good person to reach out for that.
Okay.
She has claimed to be in the laboratory that is under Zorro Ranch that Epstein used to own, where they did all of those like weird experiments and stuff. And um, one prominent name that's like tied to Epstein regarding all of that is a guy named George Church,
Okay.
and he has a company called Colossal Biosciences that was in the news this year because they resurrected the dire wolf from ancient DNA.
That was a big story. Yeah, I heard that story.
Yeah, the guy behind literally resurrecting the dire wolf was Epstein's like eugenics guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah, and so I look at people like Elon that have multiple kids. The guy from Telegram, I've seen multiple things where he has like tons and tons of kids.
Oh, that was it. That was what you were talking about, was the guy from
Yeah,
Telegram. I was like, what?
yeah, yeah, he has so many kids, and it's sort of a thing with like these technocrats where it's like they're trying to populate the world with their own lineage. They can't fight a war physically against people, so if they just have as many kids as possible and then slowly kill the rest of us, then they win the war of attrition.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. It an, another thing you were talking about in regards to this whole thing with the technocracy is that you were talking about how these guys wanted to exert their control on the system by having their technology integrated into everything,
Hmm.
and thus you wouldn't be able to really operate in the modern society without their technology, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, there's a guy, he was like I would consider him like the original technocrat. He was around like late 19th century, early 20th century, and he served as sort of the inspiration for people like Howard Scott and ironically enough Elon Musk's grandfather Joshua Haldeman. Um,
That
yeah.
is very interesting, man. That Elon Musk's grandfather being early in the whole technocracy movement. Could you talk a little bit more about his his early
Yeah.
technocratic connections there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what happened was there was a study that was done that was called the Engineers and the Price System, and this essentially was like trying to lay out the concept that us using a like fake monetary system that's based on nothing is like super inefficient, and that humans cause inefficiencies through behaviors and like social conditioning stuff that we've gone through up to that point that wastes, time, energy, things like that, and that we should move to an energy-based currency system instead.
Hmm.
Um, and essentially, he started talking about how they would come up with this thing called energy certificates that would replace the dollar,
Hmm.
and everybody would be allotted energy certificates, and then say you wanted to like take a train car or something, you would have to then basically pay for the energy that would be consumed for you to ride on that train car, and everybody else would also have to do the same. um, Now, where this starts to get into sort of a slippery slope is that, obviously there are people that produce energy, mainly the oil companies at the time, Rockefeller and things like that. And they, Thorstein Veblen ended up attending this thing called the New School for Social Research, which was like funded by Rockefeller, and it had Rockefeller guys like running the school. It also brought in a bunch of people from like Weimar Germany in the 30s. And it was here that he started to discuss things with people like John Dewey, who's considered like the father of education of the 20th century.
Mm.
So he came up with like a basically the methodology that they use to teach how they teach people in colleges in the United States was inspired by a method of his.
Okay.
Um, so now you have Big Oil and Rockefeller. You have this Thorstein Veblen guy who's like very convincing and has this like crazy idea to flip the whole system on its head, make us energy based, and start eliminating waste in order to be more efficient. Which Doge, Department of Government Efficiency, that was sort of a callback to that. But
Okay.
and it was while Thorstein Veblen was with the New School for Social Research and a bunch of other, like, he would give talks and things like that. And he inspired this guy named Howard Scott. And Howard Scott started Technocracy Inc. with Marion King Hubbard. And Marion King Hubbard is actually the guy who came up with peak oil theory, which is the whole thing like we're eventually going to run out of oil one day, kind of thing, which plays into that same energy crisis where we need to conserve it, otherwise we will run out, so on and so forth. I'm sure there's no coincidence there or anything. Um,
Right.
and so they start Technocracy Inc. here in the United States, and they end up inspiring this guy named Joshua Haldeman, and he goes to Canada and sort of sets up like a satellite of the U.S. version there in Canada, and starts
Okay.
printing off posters and spreading that engineer in the price system book that sort of started the whole thing, and trying to convince people that the Canadian government needs to move over to this system. And Canada ended up not liking that very much. So they found him guilty of violating the Defense of Canada Act by like trying to encourage people to overthrow the Canadian government.
Hmm.
Um, and they fined him $8,000 in then time. This was like 1930 something, 1930, 1940. And he got so embarrassed. He claims to have been disillusioned by the movement, but it was only after he was found guilty and fined that he moved to South Africa and then had Elon's mom, and then she had Elon.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild. So even though did Elon really know his grandfather? Do you know anything about that? Did he
Um,
have connections with his grandfather, or did his grandfather pass and never really like kind of knew him personally?
from my understanding, he passed too early for Elon to have like any sort of meaningful relationship with him. But his Elon's mom was like very very close with her dad, and she ended up becoming like a PR marketing person. And I think she put it in Elon's head that he was like destined to fulfill his grandfather's legacy.
Oh, very interesting. Because I have local buddies that are all about Elon. Like Elon saving the day. You know, he's got free speech on Twitter and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they're very much like into technology and have their own business in like a tech oriented thing. And
Mm-hmm.
they're like all about Elon. But I'm like still interjecting when I can, saying like, I don't know, man. I know that he's involved with this technocracy thing and his grandfather, and I
Yep.
mentioned that to him, trying to like maybe they'll look a little further.
Yeah.
But apparently there was a big autobiography about Elon that came out, and you know they were talking about listening to that, and I was like, did it mention the thing about his grandfather in there? And apparently it does, but
Okay.
I don't know if it goes into what his grandfather was into
Yeah.
so much with the technocracy thing. Or they explain the technocracy thing in the autobiography. It may have stated something about that he would, because that's what my buddy told me, is like it mentioned something about that, but I don't know how deep it went into that, or
Yeah.
if people could dive deeper into it. So
It probably framed it as like this really cool thing where his grandpa was ahead of the curve, and that Elon was destined or something like that. I'm sure it did something like that.
yeah, yeah, it's. I mean, I have an engineering background, so when I started to think about like how the world was, kind of like when I was learning more about how everything operated probably back in 2008, because I was a big Ron Paul supporter, and I saw how they just kind of shoot him away. Like, you
Yep.
can't listen to this guy. Like, this, that we don't want him to be the candidate, you know?
Yeah.
But thinking about this, I was like, wouldn't it be great if the government and all these bureaucrats just went away and we just ran like a constitutional algorithm or something like that? But it's like who controls the algorithm, and
Yep.
like how, how's that all going to work, and how does that get played out? So then it's like, that's not a good idea. But I can see where like a technically minded person would envision a system like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've always been like sort of technologically, fascinated myself. I was building computers when I was like 13, 14 years old. And if you would have asked me 10 years ago, like, hey, they're talking about like putting brains in our chips to make us smarter, I would have been like, oh, cool. That sounds awesome. But now, that I've sort of done my research, and the one thing that I always like to use as like a rule of thumb is anything that like comes out, imagine the worst possible way that it could be used against you, and that's what the government's going to do in 10 years. That seems to be like it's never steered me wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it very much seems like the like like we were talking about earlier, of having all these different technologies integrated into everything. We now become dependent on them for ability to operate in the economy, and that dependence kind of puts a stranglehold on the population, to where it becomes a lot more difficult to operate without it.
Yeah.
And it very much seems like it's like this kind of slow play into it, so that we're getting more and more normalized to it.
Yeah, it's frustrating to see because like I know what's happening, and it's like you have all these institutional owners of big business, and they can basically like put their thumb on the scale of whatever they want. They have trillions of dollars of money, like most of it's fake money, numbers on a screen and stuff, and they can throw their investments behind whoever they want and elevate those things into success. And I've always been under the notion that a lot of culture, like I don't think culture is dictated by the government. I think it's largely dictated by companies. You have companies that put out products or media and material and stuff, and that ends up creating different trends and inspiring people and influencing them certain ways, and so you basically have like this completely captured system where they can elevate whatever they want through these companies, and then that in turn dictates the culture. Well, if we have companies that are all adopting, like for example, the Palantir AI, they're going to get a huge investment for that. That's going to elevate that company. That company is now going to have like a successful saturation of the market of their products and ideas. And that in turn sort of steers us, just nudges us a little bit in that direction. And then you have to think of every single company that does this, because I would say any company that's like famous enough to be like a common name, they probably started out getting funded by like Department of Defense shell companies, or like overseas stuff, or institutional banking, or Rothschild families, BlackRock, what have you. And and that's sort of what's like driving this, where it's like you're seeing all these companies saying AI is doing all this, and you see that all around you, and then you feel like you have to in order to keep up. And I mean, they did the same thing with smartphones, where it's 20 years ago, if you didn't have one, you were okay. Now you can't get a job without one. You can't, do basically anything without one. Um, and it sort of is that like boiling of the frog.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I I, you were talking about in ancient China, in I think the Monica Perez interview, you're talking about like in ancient China, they had this, like, they didn't want the population to have like an equal playing field on technology, or they were like scared that if the population started to get a foothold on certain technologies that they would, try to compete with them in some way. And very much now it seems like that, where if it was a truly free market where these companies could pop up innovations and be successful in the truly free market, that those ideas would win out. But it's not operating like that. It's operating where the government, like you said, with the Department of Defense, is creating the technologies that are going to be the ones that are distributed amongst the population, and thusly holding like this this first mover advantage on the technologies, where that they have the plans for it and what it's going to do,
Yeah.
while the population is not able to compete at the same level because they don't have the funding that they need to. If it was a truly like distributed technology that people could take advantage of,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, man. It's one of those things where like I think everybody at this point knows like Facebook started as a DARPA project, right? And so all they did was change the name of it, put
life
some
log, right?
yeah, LifeLog. And so they changed the name of it. They just picked some random university person to come be the face of it, aka Mark Zuckerberg, and then they just dump institutional investments on him so he never runs out of money. So even if it should fail, it doesn't, because they want that to permeate the market. And then I mean the same thing with Google. Like you had a Keyhole was a DARPA project to sort of like satellite navigate the Earth and record everything, surveil it in real time, and that ended up becoming Google Maps.
Mm.
So it's like every single like smartphones, I would assume, were probably an invention of DARPA that they were like, "Hey, Steve Jobs, here you go. Thanks for getting your company off the ground."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, okay, so I got to ask you about Larry Ellison, because
Mm-hmm.
Larry Ellison, like, who is this guy? They wrote a book said like God or Larry Ellison or something like that. It's like, why is he? Why did he get picked? And like, why is he the guy that does Oracle and all this databasing system for the government? And why? Where does he come from? What's going on with this guy? What's up?
Yeah, man. So, from everything that I know, is that Larry Ellison got basically like super rich in the late '80s, early '90s, by starting Oracle. He absorbed. Do you remember a company called Sun Microsystems?
Yeah,
It,
yeah,
it had
yeah.
like all the S's.
Like I think they would have some of those stations in the university that I was at, where it was like Sun Microsystem stuff that was running like the server stuff for the
Yeah,
university.
anything Java, JavaScript kind of oriented. That all came out of Sun Microsystems. So Sun Microsystems was essentially, I would consider it a DoD shell company, because it worked with DARPA basically from its inception. And they were basically responsible for setting up like the architecture that would become the foundation for the modern day like personal computer. So as far as like the architecture, the way that the software communicated with the machines, and everything like that, like they were working hand in hand with DARPA the entire time. You had people like Andy Bechtelstein. You had people like Dr. Bennett Golub and Charles Halak. They were the ones that created the algorithm that became BlackRock's Aladdin, which is that like supercomputer that can analyze everything and make investments accordingly, and that's how they're so super rich. Um,
Mm.
and you had Google's Eric Schmidt was there. Google has very close associations with Sun Microsystems. And it was essentially like a Mossad adjacent. So they were like super close with Israeli intelligence. They were also, working with the CIA, FBI, I would assume through their relationship with DARPA. And so they were building foundations for like server architecture as some of their later projects, and that interested Larry Ellison a lot. So he ended up buying them and turned Sun Microsystems into what would become Oracle Cloud Computing. So he just like came in, got all their technology, absorbed it into his company, and then his very first customer with Oracle was the CIA. InQtel, the venture capital firm that the CIA actually claims, they ended up offering him his first contract, and then that's when they started storing data on his servers and stuff, and paying him money, getting him government contracts, and that's what effectively made him a billionaire today, because that exponentially grew. He started working with private sectors as well, and now he has a cloud that's operated by data centers around the world.
So does Epstein kind of works into this, right? Because like, why are these guys propped up? Like, how do they get the magic key to the kingdom? I mean, like, do they have the blackmail on them, and that's why they're the guys that are the front men for this stuff? Like, how do they get to be prominent figures or be picked out of all these people? Like, is it just because they are that smart, or is it just like they're the guy that is willing to do really dirty stuff, I guess?
That's actually a great question. I think a lot of them are recruited out of like universities. Epstein was very very involved with like MIT, for example. He actually was like donating to MIT directly, and then a guy named Joishu Ito, he was like the head of MIT for their media lab, and people found out about it. He ended up having to step down because of that. You have people like Peter Thiel that recruit out of Stanford University regularly. That's where basically Sun Microsystems stands for Stanford University Network. So it was sort of created there, and I think it might have been like the late 70s or early 80s. There's declassified CIA documents talking about how they basically pulled a coup at Stanford, like an ideological coup, by installing CIA agents to be professors or plants at schools so that they could keep an eye on people who could be potentially radicals in the future, or people who seem like they could be useful in the agenda, whether that they were highly intelligent, highly influenceable, well connected, whatever that looks like. And I think a lot of these relationships sort of stem from that. Like one notable example is at Yale. That is where J.D. Vance met Peter Thiel and Vivek Ramaswamy for the first time.
Yeah, him coming out was such a weird thing, man. They had that whole document or like whole movie that came out about him. Like,
Yeah.
what? Where did the vice president dude that gets picked for vice president have a movie come out about him before he gets picked as vice or like, what is going on here?
Yeah. Actually, funny story about that. So this was like right before he was starting to get big, and I think it was right before he won his Senate seat, if I remember correctly, or right after. But comes out with this book called Hillbilly Elegy that was published by Rupert Murdoch of Fox News. And then he got the Netflix deal. He ended up becoming senator over Ohio. You remember the Ohio train derailment thing that happened?
In East Palestine? Yeah.
Yep, that was like right after he took office. Yeah, and then right after that, he started setting up this thing called Our Ohio Renewal, which was like a fund that was dedicated to combating the opioid crisis in Ohio. And he ends up tapping this lady named Sally Sadel to lead the entire thing. And his book Hillbilly Elegy, he talked about his mom and her, addiction to opioids and stuff. Now, the reason that Sally Sadel's important is because she was basically the PR queen for Purdue Pharmaceuticals, and was like trying to blame victims instead, basically saying they were addicts for like listening to their doctors, trying to increase dosages, trying to prescribe to kids as young as like 11 years old. And this was all after like the Sackler family was found guilty of perpetuating the opioid crisis. He then taps her to run this opioid crisis,
Hey,
basically.
we're good guys, man.
Yeah, and it's hilarious because JD Vance used to contribute to this thing called American Enterprise Institute, which is owned basically by Purdue, and that was where Sally Sadel was posting all of her articles, like defending Purdue and shit, and that was run by the Sackler family. And then JD Vance goes on the Theo Vaughn podcast and pretends like he doesn't know who the Sacklers are.
Okay.
Yeah. And so like there's this weird stuff like even way before he got tapped with Trump, you know, he was part of that Mithril Capital with Peter Thiel, where, you know, people claim that they never saw him show up in the office, but he was getting like, you know, close to six figures or more for doing nothing. And I think that, you know, that on top of his congressional donation from Thiel being like the largest one we had had in history up to that point for the United States, like, man, they have been planning him to be in that VP spot for a while. And the fact that he was able to just like pop up out of nowhere and then, you know, 4 or 5 years later he's vice president of the United States, like that shows how effective I think the system is.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, man. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yale, you said he went to Yale?
Yeah, he went to Yale with Vivek Ramaswamy, who also ran in the 2024 election. They were such good buddies that JD Vance's son is named Vivek after Vivek Ramaswamy.
No way.
Swear.
Okay, I'm gonna dig into that. Wow. But so I'm a big listener of the Grand Theft World podcast, and
Yeah.
Richard just talked about how Yale was an institute of the British East India Company was what one of the things that he was talking
Oh
about.
wow.
So yeah, it's like very much what you're talking about, like kind of they use this thing as like a recruiting center in
Yeah.
these big Ivy League institutions, and they're like running psychological profiles, I guess,
Yeah.
on all these guys that are coming through. Like, can we use this person in this way or this way? That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, man. They call them cloak and dagger professors, and those are like, you know, they might have the qualifications to teach, but they're really there to propagandize people, keep an eye
Yeah.
on stuff.
Yeah. That John Dewey was uh that was the guy that you were talking about that was kind of like orchestrating some of the stuff behind the university systems earlier on.
Yeah. He introduced basically like teaching methods that got kids to basically like push boundaries and suspend like morals, be like more prone to suspend morals in the pursuit of knowledge, if that makes sense. Sort of like a we were so busy asking if we could, we never stopped to ask if we should kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of like their vetting process a little bit, or you could consider it like, okay, this is how we're gonna vet who we may want to bring into the fold or something like that.
Yeah, and that, you know, it's like someone goes to Stanford, they're like really, really intelligent, they test high, and they take like Hegelian idealism as a class. The CIA's like, "Oh boy, you're in." You know, they see all that stuff and they're like, "Green light, let's go."
Kurt Metzger has talked about some of this, or like all this like profiling kind of stuff, because he said he was in the talented and gifted thing or whatever, the GATE program
Yeah,
they
me
called
too.
it, in some things. Yeah, but he was saying like he doesn't remember the stuff that he did in that thing or whatever. He was like, I remember maybe there was like a pink drink or something like that that we took.
They had him out there doing fluoride rinses, man. What the hell?
Yeah, something like that. Something like that. But it's like it very much seems like the human population is like steered in certain directions, and people are maybe plucked and put in certain positions from these guys that are like you said, the whole system as it's operating, basically, it's just a system that's running its course.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I don't know if this is like a super popular belief, but I even believe like the entire elections are just like a show. Um, when especially like once we transition to the digital voting machines, like I don't see how it couldn't be a show, because all you got to do is just change the numbers. Like exit polls, you can rig those, you can pay people, like we obviously know like USAID pays half of the media that's in the country, and then you have people like Mike Flynn and Israel paying the other half, and so it just creates this like huge illusion. And I've been looking into like the Dominion voting machines and what was that other one? Smartmatic was the other one. They were sort of brought up a lot in like the 2020 election. I think all of that, like the Joe Biden numbers were inflated to let him win so Trump could have this comeback story and install the techno. Like I think all of that was faked.
I mean, it is like I've heard the description of using like kind of a press pulse technique where you put a lot of pressure on society and then you kind of lay off.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Trump, it just seems like that's kind of like, okay, we're laying off here right now, and like things are going to be good, and like you got your daddy in there
Yeah.
now, so your daddy's going to take care of everything. It's going to be okay, and it's like all the while there's this new thing that's being built in the background, kind of sneakily, where
Yeah.
people are distracted, you know, and then
Absolutely.
we wake up inside of the cage that we can't get out of.
Man, and it's all because we didn't trust the plan hard enough.
Dang it, if you just voted harder, man. Trust the plan all the way to the cage.
Right.
Um, One of the things that you were talking about as well was the whole thing going on with you had Epstein and Howard Lutnick, and Howard Lutnick's getting closeness with Trump and everything.
Hmm.
Like, so he had some house that was like close to Epstein or something like that.
Oh, he owned the house right next to Epstein. He was his next door neighbor, and apparently still owns the property too. From what
Wow.
I've heard, and it's the more you start digging into like Howard Lutnick and Cantor Fitzgerald, um, he was supposed to have been in the towers during 9/11. Conveniently wasn't there the day that it happened. He is Habad Lubavitch. So like all those black hats you always see hanging out with Trump, the ones that came out of the tunnels last year, the ones that run like Israel's Likud party and stuff like that he's that. That do you remember that picture where Trump was like praying at that grave site last year? It was
I don't know if I saw that one.
it was Howard Lutnick, Ben Shapiro, and Donald Trump, and they like all went to this grave site where
Okay.
yeah,
Shapiro.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's supposed to be like this sacred place in the Habad Lubavitch movement because there's this guy named Rabbi Schneerson who was considered like their prophet basically. And so he's got like this deified element about him, and they went to go visit his grave basically as like paying homage to him.
Oh,
And
weird.
yeah, and the Habad Lubavitch are the ones that like follow the Kabbalah. They're like the religious extremist ones that are pushing like Israel to do the genocide, pushing, APAC and Donald Trump and influencing Europe and, the mass immigrations that we're seeing. And so like this is all coming from this little group. And like Epstein was also part of Habad. Um, I was doing a show with Richard Willett from Iconic, and I think he might have been the guy I was speaking about the Kabbalah with. It was either him or CJB, but um,
CJV, I think, was the guy I was listening to.
Gotcha. Rich Willett is a fantastic resource on the Kabbalah as well. He's been studying it like close to 20 years, I think, and
Oh wow.
he actually did some research that Jeffrey Epstein grew up like basically across the street from a Habad Lubavitch place
Oh
that
really?
he ended up going to spend a lot of time at and stuff. And there's rumors, you know, it's hard to kind of quantify or like have evidence for, but that maybe he was connected even a little bit back then.
Oh wow, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
And
And the whole Donald Barr, William Barr thing with
yep,
Epstein and how he got into the Dalton school without like any kind of credentials, I guess,
yep.
for being able to do that and just got in there and um what Donald Barr writing some kind of weird sci-fi thing with
Yeah.
like
Yeah, it's insane, man. And you know, outside of like the Habad Lubavitch stuff, you have Howard Lutnick's relationship with Tether, which is like a stable coin.
Howard
Um
Lutnick is involved with the Tether thing.
he basically is like their custodian, so he like is the decision maker of the company.
Now Brock Pierce, isn't he also one of the guys in Tether?
Yes, he co-founded Tether in Shanghai, China with Craig Sellers and Reeves Collins.
Wow, so he was at Anarchapulco in 2020 talking about a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. A funny story about Brock Pierce. So in 1999, he started this company called Digital Entertainment Network, which was like an online TV station where they did a bunch of shows and stuff. He was mainly focused on like teenage entertainment. He had the show called Chad's World, which was about like a openly gay teenager at the time, you know, late 90s, early 2000s. And he was basically trying to launch like the first online entertainment company this way, like a precursor to Netflix or something like that.
Hmm.
And it was while he was there that he was accused by some of the actors of child sexual assault. And so were a couple of the other people involved. And they ended up having to step down from the company and basically like settling the whole thing out of court so that it wouldn't go to discovery. And then years later, Brock Pierce is hanging out with Epstein.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was Brock Pierce.
Why is Brock Pierce at an anarchist convention?
Beats me, man. Beats me. Probably trying to like capture it and like, hey, I'm with you guys, you know, let's overthrow the system and put my crypto in there. And secretly his crypto is just like a digital currency Trojan horse.
Yeah.
And it's being pumped by China as like a way to basically screw over our economy. They're like it's I'd have to go back and look at the details, but essentially China is like helping them fake how much they're worth so that we buy into Tether, and then they're going to pull the rug out from under us.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like there's this big push, it seems, to like, okay, let's do this digital or like the Genius Act thing that just passed or whatever,
Mhm.
right? Like they have these things written in there about like all these stable coins must be tied to what treasuries, US treasuries
Yep.
or dollar backed equivalents some kind. So it's like they want to yeah, kind of prop up this whole private. It's private, guys. We
Yeah.
swear.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm actually like working on a piece right now talking about how like the Genius Act plays into a larger sort of thing. Um, so you have like all of these crypto companies that are essentially being given the power to become their own like Federal Reserve. So they can become their own like bank and crypto issuer and things like that. And by having the one to one, they essentially have to assure that their coin's value is pegged to the dollar. And that just facilitates adoption because if you know you could trade $1 for one tether, makes things easy, makes people more likely to use it, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you'll recall that like right before COVID and shortly after, there was like the explosion of Bitcoin mining operations and like crypto mining operations and stuff. And all of the transactions that take place on blockchains and stuff require energy in order to transact. And then I want to bring back up the energy certificates that I was talking about earlier with the original technocracy movement, and
Mm-hmm.
then understand that we have things like carbon credits that Elon Musk pushes and is still actively being pushed in like the Trump administration. And you slowly start to see that like all of these stable coins have been taken over by the same institutional investment firms that ran the fiat money system, but now they're able to quantify the amount of energy associated with transacting on the chain, which just brings us one step closer to that energy based system. And you have the Trump administration that is backing like crypto mining operations, cutting red tape, and making deals with companies that can set up like AI powered data centers using like American taxpayer money and our infrastructure money, because it's going to like bring business. It's not their data centers where they're going to put bunch of H-1B Indians in there to like clear error codes and stuff, and that's not going to translate to jobs for us. And essentially, you have like Trump being invested in these, being able to remove like regulations and pass policies and stuff that allow for adoption. You have all these companies that have data centers and AI that can mine all of the crypto and buy massive amounts of it and stuff. And it basically turns into like this huge circle where Trump just keeps getting richer, all of his friends keep getting richer with made up money, and we all end up worse off because of it.
Okay, so you know, Bitcoin was really presented as in like the freedom community is like, okay, this is going to be the alternative to getting rid of the Federal Reserve, and we'll get the Fed out of our lives. We'll use this as an alternative, and now with all these stable coins and like you're saying, like these guys like Brock Pierce getting in there with Tether and all this stuff, and Howard Lutnick and that connection, and they're very much seem like they're being propped up to be like the dudes.
Yeah,
And you know, looking at alternatives, and I attempt to get people solutions and alternatives, and I talk about privacy coins and why they're, why I think they're important and at least like an alternative mechanism. But like, what are your thoughts like on the privacy side of things in the crypto space?
yeah, absolutely, man. I actually got into this with Jason Bassler when I was on his podcast, but I'm under the belief that it's digital currency at the end of the day. Whether you're using a privacy coin or not, like you're transacting on blockchain, that's what they want. Right now, we're seeing like coins like Monero that are under attack from people that are basically trying to coup the governance node. So they're trying to basically prop up enough nodes to own 51% of the chain, and once they do, they can change the governance of that, and then all past transactions are can be publicized.
Ooh.
And I am right there with you where it's like I want a solution, but to me it's like the solution is grow some fucking food and trade with your neighbor. Like if you want to stay off the agenda, like get off the blockchain and get in the garden.
Yeah, that's if this world that we're moving into is very much where it's like we're disconnected from each other and we're constantly online and we're exporting our thinking to things like AI, then in order to avoid that trap, we really have to like reconnect with each other in meet space and start doing more impersonal things
Yeah,
and building relationships again. Because in order to not fall into that, we're going to have to become resilient outside of it.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. Like I'm under the impression like with the stuff I covered with like Sun Microsystems and the early tech companies and stuff. I mean, this goes back to like the Manhattan Project when they were trying to implement a lot of these things. You have Bell Labs with like AT&T and doing the phone systems and stuff back in those. That was a precursor to the internet, just trying to like get us all connected on this system that can be monitored and get us away from public discourse. And the public discourse is so important for us to have, and we don't do that anymore. Um, like when it comes to sending anything digitally, you have to assume that if it's done digitally, that somebody is going to see it. It's going to be captured, recorded, tracked, used against you at some point. And so, if you want to have a private conversation with somebody, you either have to go out in the middle of the woods with no phones or like pass handwritten notes back to each other. And if we're serious about like wanting to get out of this as much as possible, then it starts with us. Like we are each in control of how far out of the system we want to be. And it's not only, our decision, but also our responsibility. Where you'll have people 10 years from now that are upset about the way that things are, that we're not taking people seriously and not preparing for things and not doing research into the world and stuff. And it's like, I want to help you before that happens, but we got to put in the effort now before it's too late. And that's why I'm a huge fan of the things you're doing, man. Like actually connecting with people and actually networking with people and meeting them in person and going to these events and stuff. So I commend you for doing what I think we're supposed to be doing, man.
Yeah, well, I've seen it for a while, at least like you said, you're a bigger picture kind of guy, and I don't know everything that's going on, but I am seeing like the patterns emerge or whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
where this is all leading. And at one point, I was like, the best thing that we could do is be very skilled and highly self reliant. And I was down the path of like Uncle Ted was right, man. I'm just gonna go
Yeah.
off in the woods and like just disconnect from this whole thing.
Yeah, man.
But then the whole COVID thing happened and all that kind of stuff, and I'm like, as the system is set up, still functioning, you might be able to go off and do your lone wolf thing and be all right. But like, as this thing continues to move forward, like you're gonna need people that you're teamed up with, man,
Yeah.
in order to like be able to make it if you don't want to comply with all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, man. There's strength in numbers, and I'm seeing like they're starting to add robot dogs to like city police and stuff, and I'm like, oh man, it's we're gonna need everybody. We need everybody to get on board, be against this stuff. Like, if you want to be left the hell alone, you don't want to be like spied on. You want like your work to mean something and actually go towards like building stuff for yourself instead of lying in the pockets of billionaires. Like, do it. What's stopping you? If you think shit sucks right now and you don't like the way the government is, get away from it. Start talking to people.
Well, and for me, for the longest time, it was the fear of like being judged by others
Mm-hmm.
or doing something that's like it's got to be the best thing, otherwise I can't do it and I can't like take action on it.
Yeah.
But once I was like, okay, perfect is the enemy of the good. You just need to start doing something, even though it's totally wrong and you suck at it. Like,
Yeah.
just start doing something to get yourself in a little bit better position than you were yesterday, and just keep building on that, because you don't have the time to just sit in your mind all the time and see this stuff and not take any actions. Like, you need to start doing stuff, and you're going to get better.
Yeah.
But if you never take those initial steps, you're never going to get anywhere. So you just need to
Absolutely.
start something, even though it
Absolutely.
sucks.
Yeah, and like you can't be afraid of failure and stuff, because it's like, I mean, you fail and what happens? You're back at square one where you are right now. Maybe you learned something, maybe you got better at something. Like you definitely pick something up along the way, and it's like I'm just some random guy who decided to like start looking stuff up, and then I started talking online. I never expected the like support that I've gotten and opportunities that I've gotten, and I think people sell themselves short all the time, of what they're capable of, whether it's from the government telling you that you suck, or it's think tanks or the news or whatever that is. Like everything in society feels like it's sort of meant to groom us to feel like we're not capable. And man, humans are amazing people. Like we have accomplished so much stuff. And I think, when people sell themselves short like that, that's exactly what they want. So even if it's just to spite the powers that be, go follow your dreams.
Absolutely, brother. Yeah, yeah. It really that's the ticket for folks. Like if you're thinking about wanting to pursue something, like write the dang thing down and just start doing some stuff, man. Like
Yeah,
doesn't matter what whatever your avenue is, but like we do have a lot of power, right? Like we have the power to like not give energy to toward that thing and like start giving energy toward the people that are locally around us that are doing stuff and producing things. And like number one, I think, is food. Like
yeah,
if we can't feed ourselves, like how are we going to provide any kind of resistance to this thing?
absolutely. I just on my last live stream I was talking about, and I was like, look, if everything fails tomorrow, people still got to eat 2 or 3 times a day. People talk about like, I want to invest in silver and gold. It's like, hey, that's cool. It's physical. It's like a thing. It has utility in some places. You still gotta eat. You should probably prioritize like getting your own independent food system started and things like that. At least learn how to grow a potato. Something like if you do 1% a day in 3 months, you're 90% of the way there. So
Chickens.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Get some backyard chickens, man, and you'll start getting addicted to the whole food growing thing, and you'll take away all the food waste that you're throwing away, and you'll get eggs out of it. So it's
Yeah,
like start with some hens, man, and
abs-
just start that in your backyard, and or find somebody that's doing some of that stuff and start talking to them.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, like you said, you can do backyard chickens. You can make a little coop out of some scrap wood, and if you got a
Even though
couple,
it sucks, just do it, man. Yeah.
yeah, and that's you can build upon that foundation. But it's that first step. It is the hardest, but it's also the most important.
Well, awesome. Yeah, I was so glad that got to get on the show with you. And like Charlie was asking me some questions about like how do you do the Food Network or whatever, and I was
Yeah,
like, I'm thinking like more with the stuff that we're talking about on our freedom cell, because we're like, wow, the food, we're getting attacked on food stuff, so we need to like do some kind of underground food network system or whatever. And I think it was looking for more like, okay, well, how have you built the local thing that you're doing? And it's like it really has been just like, okay, we got the freedom cell group going, and we're just meeting, and we just got like-minded people together, and we're just kind of building those connections from there, and then finding people around the local area and inviting them into the freedom cell and trying to get something going from there.
yeah, man.
um,
Absolutely. Like one thing I've kind of tried to do is like I frequent the farmer markets in my area.
mm-hmm.
Just because I mean that's where they all go, and if you end up going there, it's like you don't have to go to 50 different places to talk to 50 different people. You can, go to this farmer's market. There's a couple people there. You find people that are in your area. You make some friends. Maybe start dropping some like, hey, how do you feel about Monsanto? And see what they say. If they're like, oh, I hate George Soros and Bill Gates, you got a good one. And you just build from there. You build those relationships and stuff, and like you said, it's you just get out and do it, and that's the most important part.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Seven, thank you so much for your time, man. Where can people find you, follow you, support your work that you have going on?
Yeah, I'm most active on X, so people can follow me there at 7Cs underscore. I stream weekly. And I do that on X, Rumble, and YouTube. And then because of like the way that we're going with like digital ID and stuff, I launched my own website where you don't need an ID, you don't even need a login, and it's 7seas.tv. There's no chat function because I don't know how to do that. That's a little above my pay grade. But if you want to catch the stream and you don't want to be, tied with your tokenized ID and all this other stuff, like come stop by.
Well, excellent, man. I really am thankful to have got to meet you and chat with you. And yeah, let's keep this relationship going, man. And yeah, guys, if you like this, please share it around with folks that get value out of it. And like and subscribe on the channel. And we'll catch you guys on the next one. And Seven, thanks again, man.
Thank you, Greg. Have a good one.
All right. Appreciate it.